Retro.
Hey, you scruffy nerf herders. This is Catherine Tabor, Mission Veo from Knights of the Old Republic, and you're listening to Jay and Dennis on Podcast Stardust. Aren't you lucky?
Welcome to Podcast Stardust. This is the fully owned and operational podcast dedicated to Star Wars news, reviews, and discussion. I'm Dennis Keithley.
And I'm Jay Krebs.
And we are starting this week off with the next episode in our The Clone Wars rewatch. But before we get into that, Jay, why don't you go ahead and remind everybody what our social media contacts are?
Absolutely. We are on Facebook and Instagram at Podcast Stardust.
Okay, the dish is lined, the signal's boosted to maximum output, the shield is down, we are now broadcasting to the galaxy. So we are discussing Mercy Mission, which is episode 5 from season 4 of the Clone Wars. Go ahead and give us a summary of this episode, Jay, and I'm eager to get into discussion, and we'll get into why in just a sec.
Yeah. Oh, and I forgot to say Kazabani. So there you go. Okay. So here's our summary. R2-D2 and C-3PO find themselves attached to a relief mission when the Republic transport they are on is diverted from a combat mission to provide relief to Aleen after that planet suffers an earthquake. Originally tasked with restoring the computers and translating, the two droids soon are thrust into a more localized dispute when an aftershock sends them into the underworld of Aleen. There they find another race of beings that are suffering from exposure to the outside air. After meeting a mystical being, R2 and Threepio return to the surface and seal an entrance to the underworld, thereby restoring peace to the planet.
Okay. I'm about to ask you what your overall thoughts on this episode were. But I have to start off by saying is I had no memory of this episode at all before rewatching it today. And what's weird is that I remembered the 4 episodes that precede it from the season, and I remember the story arc that comes after it when it goes to Umbara and we meet Pron Krell, the Basilisk Jedi that turns on the troops. Spoiler alert. But this is like, what is this? How? I've watched the Clone Wars all the way through a couple times. How can I not remember this episode at all? But this was brand new. This is, for all intents and purposes, this was brand new to me when I watched it today. But what did you remember this episode, or what did you think when you watched it?
No, it's funny that you say that because I was thinking the same thing, because I thought I said the same thing last week too, if you recall.
Yeah.
And so I was sitting there thinking to myself, how can I have 2 episodes in a row that I just don't even remember watching? And I just wonder if it was because, once again, I say this all the time, when I was watching these for the first time through, at least, I was just devouring them because my kids were younger. And so going back to watching the Clone Wars, I would pick and choose what I would consume as far as different arcs and that type of thing. So I just don't think I ever revisited this one. So yeah, so it was very much like a brand new kind of thing for me too.
Yeah. I don't want to belabor the point on this one, but it's just like a lot of times I get some of these episodes and I'm like, I kind of remember this, or I remember the gist of this, but there was just nothing about this one that I remembered. And so anyway, it was really unusual. That being said, what did you think about this episode overall?
Well, I just think this is the perfect example of, we've talked a lot about whimsy in Star Wars and George Lucas's affinity for whimsy. And so I think that this was part of that kind of homage to that, because obviously Dave Filoni doing the Clone Wars and George Lucas was still very much involved with the Clone Wars at the time. So it felt very George Lucas in that way, but it also felt more like a myth or a fairy tale than a traditional Clone Wars story, obviously, because the war itself becomes almost irrelevant in this particular storyline, because you're looking at the fact that there's no fighting, there's no separatists, that there's this relief mission, which, I was thinking to myself, the droids, the clones really have a lot of training in disaster relief and engineering of things. Where did this all come in?
Mhm.
As opposed to just utilizing them on the battlefront. So that was kind of an interesting take, I thought too, but it's kind of an interesting little palate cleanser right in the middle of everything else that we're going through too. So, not sure how I feel about the episode overall other than, just trying to take it at face value for those kinds of things, and it was just a fun way to look at different types of cultures. But what do you think?
I like what you had to say about it, that this felt like George Lucas, and I 100% agree. That's what I was thinking about, is that this seems like the very much the George Lucas Tale of Whimsy. I was thinking Willow when I saw this one, and then I went and watched the featurette that's on StarWars.com, where this season, instead of doing like one featurette per episode, which they primarily did in conjunction with the release of the series on DVD, they've been doing these Q&As with Dave Filoni, and he does like 3 questions about 3 episodes at a time, like 1 question per episode. And so he talked a little about this one, and we'll get to Oprhne and these creatures that live below world and stuff like that in a second. But he was talking about the whimsy to some degree, and that, exploring these like fantasy type elements that George Lucas did with Willow and such. And so I was like, well, I'm glad he confirmed that. So it seems like George Lucas at least had his fingers all over this episode,
Mm,
and but I can't confirm exactly how much. Uh,
sure.
but the other thing that stands out is that there is no Obi-Wan, no Anakin,
Mhm.
no Padme for the most part in this episode, other than a brief, holo appearance. But it's really no Ahsoka. It really is a story for R2D2 and C3PO. And truth be told, the way this all pans out, there's no need for any Jedi to really have a big role in this episode. It's not about that, but it really, as you were saying, it has no impact on the Clone War that's raging across the galaxy right now. The outcome of this is not determinative for anything that happens between the doesn't have to be completely determined, but it doesn't really push things one way or the other for the Separatists or the Republic. By the time this is all said and done, it's just the ultimate like little side quest for R2 and 3PO in this one.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
yeah, I'm fine with that, but it just is it's just an interesting choice when your show is called The Clone Wars to have this type of story sitting right in the middle of it.
Right. And I thought that myself as well. I thought to myself, okay, what is the actual point of this
Mhm.
particular story other than to maybe show, again, the whimsy, but also to show that the Republic is more than just fighting, that
Mhm.
they're still out here trying to help worlds and jump in any way they can. And, you'd mentioned Padme in her brief appearance at the very beginning. And, obviously we know her as being consistently representative of things like diplomacy and mercy and public service. So, I mean, it made sense that we saw her at the beginning.
Mhm.
But yeah, like again, I just don't know why I didn't remember this episode, but yet A Sunny Day in the Void is just broiled into my brain for
Yeah.
for some
I try to forget
reason.
that one, but
Exactly my point.
yeah.
But at any rate, yeah. So here we are.
Okay. The other thing that was interesting to me is that it was the choice of the clones in this one. And I'm not certain I understand how R2D2 and C3PO ended up being attached to Commander Wolffe and his clones in this, as opposed to Rex or Commander Cody or whatever. But they chose to go with Wolffe as our lead clone. He's in charge of this Republic slash Jedi transport that's on its way to a battle someplace else when they get the report of these earthquakes that happened on Aleen. And so they've been diverted there to provide supplies and help the Aleenians, or the Aaleena, I think is what they actually call them, get back on their feet. So they show up there
Mhm.
with the mission to set up a hospital, set up a food place, get the computers back online, and then get back to the war. And Yoda makes
Mhm.
that point. It's like this is you're not going there for a long time. This is just help out some of our people and then move. Uh, so I mean I don't want to make a big deal of it, but okay, but it's not like 3PO is the only translator droid in the galaxy, and nor is R2 the only astromech that's capable of doing the things. The story called for them. That's the droids we know. That's who they wanted to highlight. So yeah, I get the story reason, but still it seemed a little weird that those two would be attached to Commander Wolffe as opposed to anybody else.
Well, I think maybe the answer to that is the fact that we saw Padme at the very beginning. So I think that's the key to this, because she obviously has access to both of those droids, and that's who she's familiar with. So it would make sense that she would be the one to send them. But as far as how, Wolffe and Plo Koon's company ended up at this place in this time, is another question. But obviously in our notes you have Commander Wolffe exists because of Dave Filoni's fascination with wolves. This might just been an episode for him to have an excuse to use those assets.
Right. And I guess my point though is that the story talks about how they were on their way to a battle when they got diverted to this. So it's like, so it's not like really Padme had an opportunity to then send 3PO and R2D2. There seemed to be implying that, get off at this exit, the GPS is, take a detour at exit 3 and go to Aleena. And so to help, which I don't want to make a mountain out of molehill here, but it just was weird. When we see 3PO and R2D2, they're always with Anakin or Padme, in this situation, they're busy on Naboo or Coruscant or somewhere. They're not really sent out with other clones to take care of these things. So
right. Yeah. And 3PO obviously was not happy to be on this mission, because he even said, I wish we were on the balcony in Coruscant looking out over the spires, and he was just not having it for sure.
I'm not made for combat.
Yes.
What did you think about the way the clones treated 3PO and R2D2 in this one? They didn't particularly like them.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up too, because I thought about that too. They were very, and even 3PO was like, you don't have to be so rough, kind of thing. And I think a lot of that just boils down to the fact that, think about what their experience has been. Who have they fought against? Mostly clankers. So they might just have this kind of preconceived notion that all droids are, not exactly the most fun to have to deal with. And so maybe that trickles down to their interaction with 3PO and R2. But it's funny because they do treat 3PO a lot worse than R2. R2, they seem to respect a little bit more than 3PO. And I don't know if it's just because 3PO is so fussy, or just that they resent the fact that they had to be burdened with them in the beginning, or what it is. But what do you make of it?
Yeah, I had a lot of similar thoughts to what you did, which is this is just residual from the conflict where they're fighting battle droids and droids of all makes and sizes and along the way. And one of the things we always praise about the Clone Wars is the way that they take all these guys who otherwise look identical and they give them personalities, even though they also talk the same way, they have same voices, whatever. And so, Rex and Cody would be kinder to these two. That doesn't mean every clone has to be nice to them, but at the same time, it's just like, it's just a translator droid and astromech. It's not like either one of them holding a blaster and pointing it at you. So it was just kind of a, and I understand, this is not an unusual commentary on 3PO. It goes back all the way to the 70s and 80s when it's like, he sure is talky. I could see why it would be difficult to have to spend a lot of time with him when he just might not ever shut up. But still, they just seem to be a little on the rude side than you would think would be necessary. So
I would agree.
Right. So they get to Aleen and they're dealing with the Aleena, and to me, this is kind of like they are the stand-in for the Ewoks almost. They weren't worshiping C-3PO, but they certainly were heaping a lot of praise on the efforts that he was bringing to resolve the situation and trying to get through to him that something needed to be done about making peace with the Earth and stuff. So on the one hand, they kind of came off primitive in that way. Yet, there was a couple of them that walked right into the tower that held all the computing equipment and seemed to know how to do everything in there.
Right.
What did you think about the Aleena?
Yeah. The first thing that I thought was hilarious was Threepio translates, "Welcome to our disaster. Glad you could come."
Yeah.
So quite honestly, and I wrote the same thing down as far as, Threepio. They didn't really look at him as a deity per se, but it did kind of have the same feels as what we saw the Ewoks sort of doing with Threepio as well. But I think they were just more appreciative of his presence and just the fact that they were able to talk to someone that actually understood them. But yeah, I mean, I think it goes to show that as much as they thought that they understood their surroundings and where they were living, they truly didn't.
Mhm.
And so there was just things that were literally right below the surface that they were missing and that they weren't paying attention to, which of course this is my time to point out the fortune cookie as I always do. Understanding is honoring the truth beneath the surface,
Mhm.
which they obviously were not doing. So they learned something in the process as well. But what were your thoughts?
There is a trope for television, and it's called the idiot ball. And when you're carrying the idiot ball, it's because you've been, and I'm not going to explain this really great, but bear with me. You've been presented with a problem. And if you would just stop and ask, like, the question that's obvious to a lot of people, you could resolve the issue. And so I can't remember what the king of the Aleena's name was, but he's going on about before we can do anything, we need to make peace with the earth. And the clones just completely dismiss that, no matter how insistent he is that they have to make peace with the earth. And they're having these earthquakes, and then they're having, what they're calling aftershocks essentially there. But this guy is still insistent that there's something else. We can't get the computers working until we make peace with the earth. And then they take 3PO and R2 to this seal that's moved on the ground. It's if someone could have just stopped, because Wolffe was so impatient to get on with this, to get off this planet. And maybe that's the excuse, and we can all live with that. But it was just he couldn't stop and ask what they meant. What do you mean peace with the earth? You're on foreign soil. You're on another
Mhm.
planet. And I get it, you're a soldier, but could you not take one moment to maybe be respectful of their ways and their culture and see what it is? It could have been a cultural thing. So, you know, instead of just trampling all over thing, stop and ask. And so, anyways, that's the point. Is like, he kind of carried the data ball and didn't do anything about it. Whereas if he had done something, maybe they get under the surface, or like, oh, we just got to put the seal back in place. Now, it would have been a 5-minute episode as opposed to the 22 that it was. But still, I think that's my biggest criticism for all of this, is that Wolffe and the other clones were so eager to get off that planet, they didn't stop just to ask, what is it that this guy is talking about? And maybe
Mhm.
just giving a modicum of respect to the Aleena.
Right. Right. Yeah, it was almost more of a nuisance to have to be there than anything
Mhm.
else. I mean, obviously good soldiers follow orders, so they were going to do what they were told, but yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, they had no patience, and even to the point where they were treating some of the Aleena as just these little annoying children, that were
Mhm.
under their feet, like just, "Oh, yeah, whatever. Okay, yeah, let us do our job." But again, I think that also goes back to the what I said before about, well, what are they trained for? They're trained for battle. They're not really trained, and we think about them as adults, but as we know with the growth accelerator, they're just kids.
Mhm.
So they probably haven't had a whole lot of ethical cultural training kind of thing. So I mean, there's definitely gaps in the education there, I guess is the way we could look at it. And they just want
Sure.
to get back to the battle as much as, that's what they're trained for. That's their purpose, quote unquote.
I got to think though that Rex would have handled this differently. That
Yeah, I think you're right.
Rex would have been a bit more
Hmm.
tolerant, and maybe that just comes down to his experience and the different places that we've seen him be compared to Wolffe.
Hmm.
But at any rate,
Hmm.
okay, so they end up underground and they first meet the Kindalo, which are a tree-like species. I was thinking Lord of the Rings the entire time I saw these guys. They remind me a
Hmm.
bit of the Ent, who are really impatient with 3PO and R2D2 that, this is a problem. There's this poison air coming in, and, they got to take care of this. And make a long story short, the seal came off that separates the underworld from the surface. And when that happened, the outside air from the surface was coming underground, which is toxic to the Kindalo, and the underground air is coming to the surface, which is toxic to the Aleena. And so the Kindalo's solution to all this was to make more ground quakes to try and knock that seal back into place. And they basically shoo Threepio and R2D2 off to look for someone named Oprhne, who's been trailing this entire time as shimmering, sparkly dust. And then she reveals herself to be some sort of a frog lady and kind of basically tells them what's going on, that, the seal's been broken, needs to be replaced, and now you got to get back to the surface. And then she gives them a riddle on how to get back. And I knew what the answer to that riddle was the moment she said it, but Threepio has to ponder for a while. What do you make of this underworld and everything that was going on there?
Well, again, I mean, whimsy, but I think for the Kindalo, they disturbed a balance that they didn't even know existed, right? So they were creating these ground quakes because, like you said, they were just trying to restore like their non-toxic ingestion of the air that they are able to breathe. So it's just shows that it's just nature defending itself, and nature isn't evil, it's just responding to what is going on around it. So I think that there was definitely that. But I was very intrigued by the fact that, and maybe it's just for the simplicity of the storytelling, but obviously the Aleena spoke their own language that Threepio had to translate, but the Kindalo were speaking basic, as was Oprhne. So, and again, maybe it was just the ease in the storytelling kind of thing. But I did like the world building of the underworld because I liked the bioluminescence aspect of Oprhne and the way that the trees were represented, if you want to call them that, and the Kindalo themselves. So yeah, the riddle was something I had to think about it for a minute. I'm not gonna lie. Like I was like, oh yeah, river, that makes sense. So yeah. And I love how Threepio was like, I figured it out.
Did you notice the trend continues for the season? The first 3 episodes were on Mon Cala, and it pit the Mon Calamari versus the Corrin. The second episode was about the Gungan and the Naboo, and now this episode is the Aleena and the Kindle. I think it's Kindalo. I'm not certain. I think the so 3 different stories in a row where we got 2 different species that inhabited a planet that are about to come to blows. It was essentially what it comes down to. So we get a bit away from that with the next story arc, but it just is. They went to that well again, but regardless. So then we meet Oprhne. Okay, I already described her. She's this, she's described on Wikipedia as a nymph, and she's also this frog-like, reptile-like creature. She first tries to eat Threepio by lashing out at him with her gigantic tongue, and she's like, "Oh, I can't eat you." And then she basically explains the problem, what they have to do to fix it. But then she does give them that riddle, and like, why? You need them to fix the problem. Just tell them how to get out so they can go fix the problem. But what'd you make of her?
Yeah, she reminded me, like you said, a nymph, but almost a woodland spirit kind of thing, or even maybe a Celtic fairy folklore. And so, yeah, and again, she doesn't solve the problem. She just points them in the direction that they need to go. And that's basically what fairies do. So I'm not sure what her position was with the rest of the Kindalo because obviously she was even of a different species than they were, and she was unique to everything else around them, unless there were more like her that just didn't manifest. But she seemed to be the one that was kind of the head of what was going on. But yeah, I thought to myself, wow, this would make a really fun play set, especially for a little girl, because you have like the way that her little petal throne was, and then when Threepio and Artoo were thrown back up to the surface, those petals kind of like closed. I thought, oh, that would be a fun little toy. But at any rate, so I'm rambling. But what did you think of her?
Oh, I mean, I appreciated her a lot more after I watched that featurette when Dave Filoni asked about the question about her, about, I think it was posed to him whether she was a Force user or not. And he's like, no, not in the way you're thinking, not like a Jedi. She has some she has some Force use that is like strays into the magical. And he equated it more similar to Mother Talzin and what the Night Sisters do than anything the Jedi and the Sith would. And then he just kind of reinforced the whole whimsy thing, and that this was, inspired by the likes of characters you would have seen in Willow and stuff like that. And this really comes off like a fairy tale when I think about it. You could see the Brothers Grimm doing something like this, especially when she leaves them with a riddle that they have to solve. And, that's a fun moment where Threepio is going through the riddle and trying to figure out what it is. I can't remember the different things he was thinking about, but then, R2-D2 is just going to the different seals that are set in the floor and sees like one that's maybe fire, the next one's a mountain, and then he gets the third one, which looks like a river. So he sprays some water on it, and that's the solution. And of course, Threepio is taking credit for having solved the riddle. There is a great shot where Threepio, I can't remember exactly what he's saying about this whole thing, and then R2's in the background, kind of his body's tilted one way and his dome is looking at Threepio, and you could almost see him like if it was a person like looking over their shoulder, like, really? Just, R2 has no facial expressions, and a lot of what we get about his attitude and his feelings are the way he beeps and emotes and stuff like this. But they just perfectly positioned him in that moment, in that room, where he's just like, while Threepio's been aimlessly trying to figure out this riddle, R2 just went into action, figured it out, and there's Threepio talking about how he resolved it, and like R2's like, you didn't notice that I already took care of this? I mean, I love that shot. And it was the closest I think they've ever come without like having R2 like run into something to like express disdain just by his posture there. So I thought that was an achievement.
Yeah, no, I mean, they always do such a great job with both R2 and Threepio, but especially with R2 in the way that, like you said, the way that he might tilt his dome, or just the way that his body posturing is with his legs, or the way that he moves, or whatever. It's almost like you said, like looking over his shoulder or tilting his head, or kind of given that like side eye sort of thing. So yeah, I think that's really good. But it's funny because Threepio, when he's telling Wolffe and the gang about what happened, of course he has his own version of everything, and R2's over there going, yeah, whatever. Yeah, I know the real truth, and that's not going to change anything. But he's okay with that. And it's not like he's protesting it, which is all R2. But I did like how Threepio, they threw some of the classic lines in there. So Threepio was saying things like, I have a bad feeling about this, and we're doomed, those kind of things. So that was kind of comfort food.
Yeah, and they even called back to that line from The Empire Strikes Back. It's like, when Luke says to R2 when they get to Dagobah, it's like, you're thinking our coming here was a bad idea. I'm beginning to agree with you.
Oh yeah.
And so they didn't do it exactly the same way, but they did that callback here in this episode as well, which I liked quite a bit. And of course they get back, as you were talking about, when they get back to the clones, 3PO's giving his own version of the story. It kind of reminded me of the what was the episode from last season when they went to the spa, and but they had to get the mailer room flute, and then when
Padme.
Right, when he gets back, what is it Padme says? She compliments with a word, impeccable or whatever like that, amazing or whatever. And then he just wanders around telling everyone, repeating that word to her. He's just so proud of himself in that moment. And I was like, yep, that's 3PO. So
yep, it is.
Well, any other thoughts on this before we wrap it up?
I mean, not really. I think we've pretty much hit everything. The only other thing that I liked was just, again, seeing some of the art on the side of the drop ships, with like Plo Koon, because that's his company, and just thinking about where Wolffe is here, and then obviously where we see him way later on in Rebels, which is so much fun to see where, kind of the origin of that comes from. But yeah, again, just an episode that I guess I didn't know existed, and now we do. And okay.
I haven't looked ahead, but now I'm wondering how many other episodes are out there that I just don't remember. No,
I know. I guess we'll discover that together, won't we?
Right. Yeah. And season 5 is a full season. Season 6 and 7 are abbreviated seasons, and we'll see if we actually recover 7, because we did that already here on the podcast back.
We did.
When we first started back in 2020. So anyway. All right, well, we'll make that decision when we get to it. So we're going to be taking a diversion from the Clone Wars to cover the 9th Jedi. So it'll probably be September or October before we get back to the Clone Wars, which is fine because this is the perfect place to take a break. We're about to get into that story arc featuring Pron Krell, which is a big one, it's quite fascinating. So I'm looking forward to discussing with that with you, Jay. But until then, thank you all for joining us for this episode of Podcast Stardust and this discussion of the Clone Wars as we continue with our rewatch. We hope you've enjoyed it. And if you want to make sure that you get all the future episodes in our rewatch and our other weekly breakdowns of whatever's on Star Wars television, make sure you subscribe to the podcast on your podcatcher of choice. And once you've done that, we'd appreciate your ratings, reviews, likes, follows, comments, whatever it is that you can do on your podcatcher. Those, one, we just appreciate the interaction. I love hearing from listeners, and I try and go around and collect that feedback every once in a while. And two, it does help us with the algorithms, getting the show in front of more people. And if you want more Podcast Stardust beyond what you're likely to find on your podcatcher, the best place you can go for that is over to retrozap.com, home of Podcast Stardust and a bunch of other great podcasts. All previous 1,065 episodes can be found there. Jay, you want to remind everybody one more time about our online presence, including where we can be found on social media?
Absolutely, Dennis. We are on Facebook and Instagram at Podcast Stardust. And as always, we maintain our Pinterest board so you can check out all kinds of fun ideas for everything Star Wars. And then if you need more places to listen to us, you can hit us up on our YouTube outlets. So we have just the audio, no video, but we are on both the traditional YouTube and YouTube Music. So please head over, like, subscribe, and share those out with your friends. And then we also have our email. So if you want to drop us a line and just let us know what you thought of this episode or any other thoughts that you have on your mind. And we also welcome any questions at any time. You can do that at podcaststardust@gmail.com. And then if you'd like to pick up some Podcast Stardust merch, and we'd love it if you would, we have a link in our show notes to our TeePublic store. So you can grab yourself some apparel, some coffee mugs, all kinds of fun stuff over there. So thanks in advance.
All right, upcoming on the show on Wednesday, we're going to get back to Darth Bane a little bit quicker than usual. We're not covering new chapters, but we have a guest on, and we're just kind of going to talk about what we've read so far about Darth Bane up until this point in Path of Destruction. It's a fun conversation. We've already recorded that one, so make sure you come back for that. And then on Friday, the plan is to wrap up the week with a look at Star Wars news. So we'll see what's going on when we get closer to time. But thanks for listening to episode 1066 of Podcast Stardust, everyone. Have a fantastic week, and until next time, may the Force be with you.